Welcome to Future Conversations, the podcast that explores research through the lens of tomorrow by Monash University, Malaysia.
Welcome to the podcast rooted in research, shaping the future through conversations today. I'm Professor Mira Sivisodi, Professor of Practice, Digital Media and Communication, Monash University, Malaysia. Discussions and research around the topic of microbiome continues to grow. But how many of these conversations are rooted in research and backed by evidence? People living in this part of the world, we really would like to know what this microbiome is all about. Does our ethnicity determine the gut microbiome? And what does the future of personalized gut health look like in a country as diverse as Malaysia? Joining me today, Professor Peter Gibson, Professor of Gastroenterology from the School of Translational Medicine, Monash University, Australia, and Associate Professor Chong Chun, Head of the Future Monash Microbiome Center right here in the School of Pharmacy, Monash University, Malaysia. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. How are you today?
Great.
Good, thanks.
Thank you.
Peter, tell me, what is the microbiome? How does it affect our health? My understanding of the microbiome is that it's a concoction of microorganisms, and that's as much as I know, right? But please help me understand it better.
Well, the microbiologists often call it the community. And so it's a community of large numbers of bacteria, fungi, viruses, microorganisms that inhabit our gastrointestinal tract. And we have it on our skin, we have it in our lungs, but in the gastrointestinal tract, it is right throughout. But there is a lot in the mouth, some in the stomach, some in the small intestine, a large amount in the large bowel. What it does, it's a key thing as far as our body's function goes.
Okay. Chun, what defines a healthy gut microbiome? And I think that is a real challenge because we always hear when you go on antibiotics, it reduces, and then a lot of us go on probiotics because we've been encouraged to do that because antibiotics kills a lot of this. Please help me define what is a healthy microbiome and how do we even know it's healthy enough?
Right. Thank you, Mira. I think this is not a simple question. So basically, we look at three things. So number one, we look at diversity. So generally, if you have more diverse set of microbes, the microbes are able to carry out more functions. So that's the basic understanding. The second thing will be looking at the balance. So we want to have a balance of good versus opportunistic bacteria, because for the good bacteria, they play important function as what Peter has mentioned. So they produce, for example, they help in digestion. They produce short-chain fatty acids. They also help in regulating the immune functions. The last one is basically looking at the functional resilience. So how are they able to recover when there's a changes? For example, like you mentioned about the antibiotics, are they able to recover after the antibiotic treatments? Are they able to recover after the change in diet? So I think these three things will be the main criteria for a healthy microbiome.
Okay, but when you say what are these good bacteria actually doing? You said it affects the function of what? How does this translate to a good functional system, if that's what you want to call it, Peter?
Well, I think one of the things that's important is that one of my colleagues calls it that it's not the community that's important, it's the goods and services they offer.
And what's the difference?
And so it's not that you have A, B, C and D and you have a lot of B and you have a little bit of C. It's what they are capable of doing given the food that they've got and given the person and their genes and their physiology. So a lot of the actions of microbiota are in the things they produce because they're very metabolically active. They produce lots of proteins and other molecules which our body is exposed to and can absorb, and it can change things. And things like short-chain fatty acids, but also things like serotonin, which is a lot of people know about serotonin because because of its association with lots of things, including depression. So what they do and what they detoxify, it really depends upon what they're exposed to. So it's not just having a good team, it's having the good food, the good things to work on, these sorts of things. And it's very different in in individual.
Is there a universal marker, Chun?
Right. So there's no universal marker. But as I mentioned earlier on, so it actually, we look at the 3 criteria that I mentioned just now, but it also varies based on, the ethnicity, where we are, the food that we take, and also basically the physical activities that one does. So it is very dynamic, so it actually changes over time.
So Chun, at the School of Pharmacy at Monash University, Malaysia, you and your team are working on finding out race-distinct microbial composition. Malaysia being so diverse, we have so many ethnic groups, and the main ones we know are the Malays, the Chinese, the Indians, the indigenous people, and you've studied quite a number of these people's feces, for the lack of a better word. What have you found so far?
Right. Thank you, Mira. So I have started looking at the microbiome of the Malaysian population since about 10 years ago. So I think one of the interesting things that we found is that the microbiome from the different ethnic group is really, really quite distinct. So for example, we see the higher prevalence of bacteria called Bacteroidetes in the Chinese, perhaps due to their access to westernized food, and majority of the Chinese are actually living in the urban city. And then for the Indian, we are actually seeing higher prevalence of lactobacillus and also bifidobacteria, perhaps related to their consumptions of fermented food and also dairy product. And we also see a higher diversity, higher microbial diversity in the indigenous populations. So it may be related to the environmental exposures and also perhaps due to their traditional diet. So a higher diversity is good because it means that perhaps they have higher function and more resilience to the changes.
Okay. I'll come back to the different types of bacteria as you mentioned. It goes over most of our heads and what does that actually mean. But Peter, have you done studies like this in Australia as well? And Australia is getting very diverse now.
There's a lot of studies going on and looking at the bacterial communities and the fungal communities and in association with disease states, in association with health, association with depression. There's a lot going on, and to try to determine whether there are any patterns which are associated with illness.
Yeah, and are there any patterns so far?
There are patterns. Whether it's converted, it hasn't really converted into therapies as such, and we might talk about that later, but there are consistencies. If you have inflammation in the bowel, for instance, inflammatory bowel disease, certain organisms seem to be not there or very low numbers of them, and so on. And this has been the pattern of all the illnesses. There are consistent patterns, but it doesn't mean that everyone has that pattern. And that's the problem. You've got you're looking at a mix of things, and the mixes are different in everyone before they get the illnesses.
Yeah, but
So
that
it's
makes
really
it so
extraordinary difficult.
Yes, it makes it so complicated because every one of us is different, isn't it? But Peter, you and your team coined this word FODMAP, and I remember doing shows on nutrition and diet and all of that, and coming across this word FODMAP. Okay, I'm going to attempt just pronouncing what FODMAP actually means. It's an acronym, and it stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. What does that even mean?
The origin of it was that one of the things our patients always ask is, what should I eat? And the answer is a healthy diet, very vague things, because we didn't know what to do. Now, in people with irritable bowel syndrome who get ongoing over months and years of bloating and abdominal discomfort and change in their bowel habits, there was a lot of information that said that short little sugars and little chains of sugars that when you took them and if they weren't digested, they go into the large bowel and they used to produce gas, bloating and problems. And there were things like fructose, lactose if you can't digest the lactose, and these things called oligosaccharides, which are just a few sugars together, which we don't have enzymes to break down. So all of these things we knew had the effect of if we gave a lot to someone, they would get bloating and they would get discomfort. But we didn't use it in clinical practice very much because if you just stopped someone taking much fructose, it didn't work very well. And what our simplistic view was that if you add 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1, you get 4 or 5. You get a bigger effect if you have each of them because they all did the same thing. The problem was that to describe this to people, I'd give a talk and I'd say, it's about fermentable oligosaccharides, blah, 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 blah. And you could only say that once or twice. And so we had to have a collective term. And we had a little competition in our department and the FODMAPs won. And so FODMAPs became the term. We were told it was a terrible term. No one will ever remember it. Everyone remembers it because it's such a bad word. So that's the reason for that. And what we found was that if you reduced FODMAPs across the board, not just one of them, but across the board, the people's symptoms with irritable bowel syndrome got markedly better than any drugs could do. Not everyone, but at least 70% of people.
So you said short chain sugar, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Give me an example.
Well, a fibre is a very long, it's got lots of sugars all bound together, big molecules. But if it's individual sugars that can't be absorbed, some of them, like glucose, are very, very easily absorbed. Fructose is not so easily absorbed. Lactose in milk is 2 sugars, and there has to be an enzyme to break it to be absorbed. They can't be absorbed unless the sugars are broken into parts, so into their individual sugars. And if they can't be digested, they just go through the bowel, bring a bit of water with it, and then get fermented. They're food for bacteria. And so the bacteria make gas, the gas distends. The bowel, in people with irritable bowel, the bowel is very sensitive to distension, to stretching. And so if you reduce that stretching, people are better. So that was the whole origin of it and the theory. And in fact, in practice, it is effective.
So then explain to me, are we supposed to be eating lactose? Why is it in some communities it's so heavy lactose? People eat cheese, for an example, in Europe. They consume so much milk. We don't as much actually traditionally here in this part of the world. How is it people in Europe are fine with it and some of us are not?
In Europe, people are not. Most people are fine with it, even if they can't digest it particularly well.
Because you said it's
how much they have.
Yeah, so you said we don't have the enzyme to break it down. So if you eat in moderation, it's okay?
It's okay. But if you've got a very sensitive bowel and you can't digest it very well at all, then you get the symptoms. So it's not that lactose is bad for you. It's just, like all the FODMAPs then, none of them are bad for you. They just induce symptoms if you have too much or if you have a lot of them, but in a normal diet, they produce symptoms if you just got a very sensitive bowel.
Okay. Chun, so how does that translate to the work that you're doing? Are you saying that, so we're lacking fiber then? The ethnic groups, other than the indigenous people, are lacking fiber, which is the long strains of sugar that Peter just spoke about?
If you look at the National Health Mobility Survey, so I think 90% of the Malaysians do not consume enough fiber. So fiber will be a very important material for the bacteria to produce important metabolites, like we mentioned about short-chain fatty acids. It reduces inflammation in the gut. It also is the the precursor for neurotransmitter, like for example GABA and serotonin. So with a low intake of fiber, then the production of short-chain fatty will be affected.
Okay, you said neurotransmitter. Explain that to me, please.
Right. So neurotransmitter will be hormones like the GABA, serotonin, dopamine. So it is actually produced mainly in the gut, right? So that's why we always say about gut brain axis, how the gut communicate with our brain. So I think many people are not aware that most of the communication come from the stomach up to the brain rather than the brain to the stomach. The production of these metabolites will then control our mood, our appetite, and our overall well-being of our mental health.
Okay. Peter, so we know this, right? We know there's this gut-brain axis. We know that the microbiome affects mental health. Does that mean if I have depression today and if I load up on fiber and get my microbiome going, my depression is going to be less?
It does not mean that, unfortunately.
I wish.
Because it's clear that while we don't know how we're supposed to change the microbiota to do this, how we're supposed to change what we feed people to do this. We know some things, but it is not at the present time a magic solution. The important thing about fibre is a lot of fibre behaves like FODMAPs, except the bacteria find it hard to digest, and so they do it slowly. FODMAPs, they do it quickly. It's like we call it like a McDonald's to a bacterium. So fibre is important because it distributes this fermentation that occurs right around the bowel, because it's being done slowly. Whereas a FODMAP will all happen just in one side of the bowel, all over, and you don't get all these good things that it's producing right around the bowel. Then the problem is that it would be great if just changing your fibre intake fixed all these problems, but it clearly doesn't, because it's not a simple, that is the reason why people get depressed. It's a factor which might alter it, but not to extent that it's a primary therapy.
You have high FODMAP and a low FODMAP. What does that mean?
A high FODMAP diet is where you would eat more FODMAPs in your diet than what most people would eat, and so you would have a lot of wheat, and fructans is one of the oligosaccharides, which produces a lot of problems. Onions. You have a large amount of onions, so you can just think of Indian curry.
I was just going to say, there goes.
And you have
the
your
food
naan
that I
and
cook.
your naan bread and all this sort of thing, so you have a big load of it. Or you drink a large amount of fruit juice, for instance, and you get a lot of fructose, then excess fructose. And in fact, how fructose was found to be a problem for the gut was first determined in children who had the so-called fruit juice diarrhea, because they were told that it's healthier to have fruit juice than to have Coca-Cola or something, and they were getting diarrhea because they were eating, instead of just water, is pretty good. So now a low FODMAP diet is where you reduce the amount of foods that you have, the quantity you have, which have got a lot of FODMAPs in them, and replace them with foods that are low in it. So that, for instance, for fruit, you would not have apples, and you would not have a lot of apples and pears, which have got a lot of FODMAPs in them, and you would replace them with blueberries, strawberries, these sorts of things are low. And so it's a replacement diet. So what it works out to be is that you reduce your FODMAPs right across your food intake and replace it with low FODMAP foods. And then if it works, if that gets your symptoms better, you then start to reintroduce foods to see what you're particularly sensitive to and to learn what your threshold is. And the important thing is that what we find is that probably about 85% of people can get back to a fairly normal diet, not a high FODMAP diet, but they get back to a fairly normal diet. But if they're having a bad time with their discomfort, they would reduce their FODMAPs again. So it's not as though this is a diet for life. It's never been a diet for life. It's educating people about where these things are that can cause their symptoms, so they can self-regulate. And so the idea of this dietary approach is to be to empower people to control their own symptoms, and it does do that.
Okay. Are you talking about the general population?
No,
or
I'm talking about people who have IBS or symptoms like IBS. There's no reason in the world why you want to be low FODMAP if you're healthy and don't have gut symptoms.
Yeah. Malaysia. Strawberries and blueberries are expensive, Chun. We can't afford to eat that on a daily basis, right? So what are our options? We can't eat apples now. We can't eat pears.
You can eat them. You only have small amounts.
Have small amounts.
Just small amounts.
Small amounts.
Because it's all about dose. I can tell you that you'd be very pleased that durians are low in FODMAPs.
It's very high in sugar. I don't know about that. But really, it's very low in the FODMAP? Oh, I see. Load up on the durians. Okay. Season's coming soon. But what are our options here then if this is where we are? We're going to eat in moderation, yes. But for those with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, what should they be consuming?
Right. So I think I'll just leave this question to Peter because Peter is the guru of FODMAP.
Oh, yes. Okay. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, this is easy to determine by, we have measured the FODMAP content of a large variety of foods. And so it is hard for me to remember all of them because I'm not a dietitian and I don't teach people this all the time. But we have produced an app that people can then access, and it tells you whether if you have this amount, you are in the red, meaning high, or the amber, which means it's the borderline, and if in the green means it's quite safe. So you can determine this by looking by a simple app wherever you're eating or whatever you want to know. And in fact, I've just been to a meeting in Penang where I use the app a few times when people ask me questions about specific foods. That's how I know about durians.
Okay. So it includes Asian type food as well.
It does. It's not. We have been working hard to extend the list of foods and fruits and cereals. Meat is not a problem. Legumes can be a problem. The major ones everywhere in the world would be onions, wheat, things like watermelon, mango are not good for fructose. And there are a few things, and every environment, every food environment has some which are very prominent in their diet.
You're being biased because all of that the Indians consume.
Yes, but you only have to reduce it for a short time.
We love our onions. We love our wheat, our rotis, filled with it, right? So do I. Yeah. I'm sure you don't eat it on a daily basis. But so what are the consequences of not eating them, though? Is there an impact if you don't, or you deprive yourself?
It's not a FODMAP-free diet, so you still have them, and you do change your microbiota. There are changes in the bacteria and the fungi in the bowel, which theoretically some people believe might be harmful. We have no evidence that it is harmful, but the fact is that that's only when you have a really strict reduction in the FODMAP intake, and that's only the first stage of taking this diet, where you're finding out whether it's any good for you or not, whether it does reduce your symptoms. So in general, there should be very little in the way of microbiota consequences of being on a very low FODMAP diet for a short time and then easing back. In people who stay low FODMAP because they have very severe symptoms or because they're poorly advised, we have no evidence that they have consequences of having their microbiota altered by it. However, when you go on a low FODMAP diet, it's very hard to keep the fibre content up because wheat is associated with fibre. Most of these things are associated with fibre. That's why we we have always been against the low FODMAP diet becoming the new healthy diet, the new gluten-free diet, or whatever,
It might just be after this podcast, actually. I mean, we're all looking for answers, and there's so much on the internet, Peter, so much on the internet, which is so confusing. If you had one, okay, let's come back to that advice later, but Chun, we spoke about the Chinese community and perhaps urban living, exposure to Western food. I wouldn't just say Chinese, actually. I would say that's a more affluent type diet, where you can afford to eat more processed food and things like that. But how would that now affect this group of people? And can we do much for them? I'm talking about processed food, Peter, and you have told me, just now when we spoke before we came on, you said you wouldn't use the word processed food. You said you would use the word ultra-processed food. What's the difference?
Ultra-processed foods, they're pretty easy to spot, because if you look at the food label in the back, there's a large number of contents, and there are numbers and things you've never heard of. These are part of Western diet. Unfortunately, food companies make ultra processed foods because they can get them tasty, they can get them into small packages, they can get longer shelf life, and they sell.
So some people would argue that it's not so much a Western diet anymore, that we use this word very loosely, and I think the Westerners get very upset about it. We are also coming up with a lot of processed and ultra-processed food in this part of the world. So how would you make that differentiation?
Well, the illnesses supposedly associated with the high-fat, high-meat, low fibre, etc., Western diet, ultra-processed foods, is the illnesses associated with it, like Crohn's disease, for instance, are on the rise in Asian countries, and quite significant rise. In fact, that's a meeting I've just been to, is on inflammatory bowel disease, and they've all got lots of patients now with it where they didn't. In Australia in 1980, we didn't see many. Now we have clinics full of patients with these conditions. So the other thing is ultra-processed foods, we all consume them, and it's not, if you look at, say, an American population, people who have a very low ultra-processed food diet, 20% of their energy would come from ultra-processed foods. That could include a supermarket bread, for instance, which has got lots of ingredients put in it.
And that's ultra-processed.
That's ultra-processed. But it doesn't mean it's bad, but if you live off that and have 60% of your energy coming from ultra-processed foods, they're the people where it seems to be associated with developing illnesses like Crohn's disease, maybe even irritable bowel syndrome. However, it doesn't mean that it's causing it, because ultra-processed foods and the content you have is a reflection of how Western your diet is, if you want to use that term. And I don't think we get upset by I'm from a Western country, but I don't get upset because we want it to be demonised a bit.
You're part of Asia Pacific now. What are your thoughts on what Peter's been talking about, Chun?
Right, yeah. So I think one of the main take that I have is the processed food term has perhaps been overused. Yeah. So I think as we had a short conversation before this, we talk about, kimchi, tofu, maybe consider a processed food. Yeah. But these are healthy processed food versus the ultra processed food, which is high in emulsifier, in sweetener, so there are a big difference. So I think one of the main challenges is that for people to understand how to distinguish the differences, how to discern the differences of what is ultra processed food and what is processed food. Yeah.
So ideally, what are we supposed to eat? If it's not processed, if it's not ultra processed?
Well,
like the indigenous people, perhaps.
It's about moderation.
That's what every doctor says.
No, but if you are coming to work and you're having having bars out of a packet, which, looks good. It's got lots of protein and lots of this and that, and the list is about this long. Perhaps that's not the best diet you're having. But you also, if you're doing that, you're probably also skipping breakfast. You're probably also not exercising. And again, I'm not talking about you personally, but this is, it's all about your living style. And it may not be the additives and the processing of the ultra processing of food, which is causing these problems, but that may be just a marker of it. Like if you have 60% ultra processed foods in your diet, you're likely not to have a particularly good lifestyle in terms of your regularity of eating, your consumption of fruit and vegetables, and so on. So this has been the big problem, because a lot of people have jumped on ultra processed foods as being bad. And yes, they're bad, but they're not necessarily causing. They're bad because they're reflecting how we're living. And we recently did a series of studies looking at low and high emulsifier diets with emulsifiers and thickeners, and you can tell if they're in them by what's on the label on the back of foods. And we found that there was no difference between low and high emulsifier diets. The effects, well, there were some differences, but they weren't what people expected. And particularly in Crohn's disease, they didn't have any effect on the disease inflammatory activity of the disease. We're worried that ultra-processed foods are going to be completely demonised, a bit like gluten has been. And in the past we had MSG was demonised, and before that eggs were demonised because they cause cholesterol problems, which they don't, and so on. We're very, what you might call, we're trying to put brakes on the over-interpretation of these things. Now, maybe it's all true that they are bad, but we need data to show that they are in humans, that they are the evil thing, because they're very easy to stop. You don't get a packaged food that's been very heavily processed. I'm not talking about frozen peas or something. They're not they're not ultra processed. They're very healthy, but it's how people interpret the information. And because it's easy to recognise ultra-processed foods, not so easy to recognise if a food's got fructans in it or this and that. You have to use an app or your knowledge or the internet or something to determine that. So you can see how it's very easy to demonise foods, but I just don't like demonisation of foods when it takes the enjoyment of eating away from people. Like, if you've got a food bar there, packaged food bars full of fibre and protein and everything else in the cupboard, you might feel guilty after this because I'm having ultra processed food, but you don't want to feel guilty about that. You only feel guilty if you're having that 5 times a day and not exercising and eating too much overall and too high fat and all that sort of thing.
But you do know we love our food here in Malaysia. I'm so afraid now. I mean, like, from onions to rotis to mangoes, yogurt.
But they're fine. It depends whether you get symptoms. There's nothing wrong with having them. In fact, I know I love Indian food, and I always eat too much, for one thing, and I always get bloated after it. But that's fine. I understand why I'm feeling bloated, but I don't have irritable bowel syndrome. I'm not getting bad pain. If you're getting bad pain from it, you've got a mechanism, a method of helping. And don't put people who go on a low FODMAP diet, don't put onions in their curries. They used garlic infused oil, which has got the FODMAP component is not there, and many of them tell us that it doesn't make any difference to the curries, that the onions are all just up here. But a lot of people don't believe that.
I don't know. I cook a lot. I just cannot imagine my kitchen without onions. I mean,
Yes, but if you're buckled over with pain every morning and are very bloated, and then you might have a different view to it.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we need to make it clear that you're talking about people with either irritable bowel syndrome or inflammatory bowel disease.
Well, inflammatory bowel disease, it's only if they've got symptoms which are not related to their inflammation. And only maybe 1 in 3 people with inflammatory bowel disease may get problems because of FODMAPs. Whereas with irritable bowel syndrome, it's 1 in 8 or so who will. We're talking here about therapeutic diet, not a diet for health.
Okay, got that. Chinwe, you are setting up Monash's first microbiome bank project, and you've already got it going, actually. What does that mean? I mean, would you like us to be a part of it? How does that work? What are you hoping to achieve from it?
Thank you, Mira. So we actually have several projects now. So one of the projects is called 1000 Microbiome Project. So the main purpose of that is to define what is healthy microbiome for Malaysian. So as I mentioned earlier on, the Malay, Chinese, Indian, we all have different microbiome. So we just ask a very simple question: what is healthy for us? So in order to answer that question, so I think one of the main things that we need to do would be to collect enough sample. If anyone is interested to contribute to these studies, you can actually go to our website. It's actually 1000 Microbiome. So you can Google that, you will be able to find a website. At the same time, we are also collecting sample from hospital, mainly looking at disorder of gut-brain interactions. So that includes IBS, functional dyspepsia, functional constipations, and we are collecting stool, urine, saliva, and blood sample. So hopefully we will be able to link the changes in microbiome to the to understand the pathophysiology, and also to understand the treatment of the disease.
Okay, here in Malaysia. So what are we donating our feces or?
For the DGBI studies, so we are collecting blood, urine, saliva, and stool sample. So at the moment, we have 3 participating hospitals. So one will be University Malaya Medical Center. The other one will be Hospital USM, and the last one is Hospital UKM.
Okay. It's not like you'd want the public to come and...
we are collecting both the patient and also the healthy control. So if you're interested, you can reach out to the medical doctor that is involved in the studies. So for that, you can actually visit the future Monash Microbiome Center website.
You earlier mentioned about some of the bacteria that you found in the different ethnic groups. What does that actually mean? And where will you take this to the next level? How will you take this to the next level? What do you want to achieve from it?
Right. So at the moment, there are a lot of studies are basically association. So meaning that we are actually seeing the increase or decrease of certain bacteria to certain conditions. Yeah. So I think the next step would perhaps be to design more in-depth research or in-depth studies to look at the causative relationship of the changes in the microbes and also the conditions. Yeah.
So I want the both of you to agree with me or disagree with me that the verdict is still out there. We still don't know a lot about the gut microbiome.
Maybe I'll start first. So I think what we know today is that definitely the microbiome play a very important part in the management of health, right? So we know that the changes in microbes does result in certain conditions, like we mentioned about the ability to digest food, the ability to produce neurotransmitter, the ability to produce certain metabolites. So that is definitely microbial driven. Using that as a therapeutic agent, it's we are a little bit early at the moment. So it will be useful to understand microbial composition that we have. Yeah. So it may helps in understanding how we design the diet, how we design the, for example, probiotics, so to make it more personalized. But it's still not ready yet to replace the standard treatment that we have for, say, things like diabetes, obesity, and also the gastrointestinal disorders.
Peter, there's a lot of the probiotics market is huge. Are you a believer in it?
Well, back in, I think my first probiotic talk I ever gave probably was in I'm 80 or something. And the conclusion was that it's very promising because they've been around since beginning of the last century. But the conclusion, if you do a talk now, is they're very promising. It has not gone to the next level where it's a reliable change. And this is one of the big problems that there's such heterogeneity. There's such huge differences between ethnic groups, between people with different dietary things, between people who live in different countries in their microbiota. And so what you're looking for is to put one bacterium in there that's going to work on everyone, every community, and it's it's doomed for failure in terms of having a big effect. They're safe,
But it might be wasted.
but usually it is wasted, I think. But it's a problem because we get some very exciting results from a randomised controlled trial in irritable bowel syndrome. There was a fantastic study done in Ireland, lots of patients, really good results. And then they did the same study in people who had symptoms but not quite severe enough to call irritable bowel syndrome. It didn't work at all, which it was completely inexplicable. And this is the problem we've got is in inflammatory bowel disease. They do preliminary studies which look fantastic. This is going to really change the world. And then when they come and do the proper randomised controlled trial, there's no effect at all. It was just that there was luck or bad luck that
Almost anecdotal, really.
almost. And this is the problem is that the concept everyone loves, the concept of having a bacterium that's going to help, but you've got so many bacteria in the bowel, and to just have a little capsule worth of bacteria that don't actually populate the bowel and stay there, they're only there as long as they're not cleared, which they all are, that it's a big ask for poor little bacteria. Billions are not very many. And some people say, you've got to have one that's got billions in, and the bigger the better. But that's not necessarily the case in many aspects. So there's a lot of enthusiasm. I love the concept. It's a great concept, very safe therapy, and but we just don't have the scientific data that has translated into gastroenterologists using it regularly. And I'm sure you've asked gastroenterologists, and most of them will just say, oh, well, if the patient wants to take them, that's fine. But, we can't really recommend them in most situations because we try to recommend things that have got an evidence base to it. And that's what Western medicine is.
Yes, most gastroenterologists whom I know, I would say don't really believe in it, don't really believe in probiotics, which then brings me to the fecal microbiota transplantation. Am I correct, Chun-Wei? Is it being done in Singapore?
Yes, they are also FMT in Malaysia actually.
Okay. And what does that entail? What do you do? And, how do you think, is it the same as probiotics? Like, it's still preliminary?
Right. So I think first of all, the FMT is slightly different from probiotics because probiotics will be known beneficial bacteria. Normally comes with maybe 3 to 5 strains in a pill that one will consume orally. But for FMT, it normally will be transferred to the host through the colonoscopy, right? So for FMT, is basically a transfer of healthy stool from a healthy donors. Yeah. So the idea is that the bacteria that we will be able to transfer through FMT will be more diverse compared to just a selection of a handful of bacteria.
Okay. And how do you know somebody's stool sample is optimal in terms of microbiota if all of us are eating?
Well, we don't, except in the early days, it was just you buy a blender and a big syringe, and you just squirt it up the bottom, and there was some, and this is how it started. Yes, but you keep it away. You keep it away from the one that you make your fruit juice concoction. But it was fairly crude. But the idea is that you're taking someone else's microbiota their community and trying to grossly change the community in the recipient. And so you had to make sure that the people were healthy, because if they were obese, maybe the microbiota was the reason why they were obese. And so you don't want to give it to, if in mice you can give the microbiota of obese mice for a thin mouse and they become fat. So it's that was one thing. Disease, whether they had viruses and funny things in there that was going to cause trouble, and it became a real problem of how to recognise that. So if you get over all the safety things, then what you find when you do studies is that there are some people who are what we call super donors, and they seem to have a really good effect when it's given to people, let's say people with ulcerative colitis, inflammation of the large bowel. There was one study where there was a super donors and there were a couple of donors who didn't seem to have any effect in the patients who got their faeces. So, but why they're super donors is not because we know what the bugs are, but it's because we know what the effect is when it's given to people. And if you're a super donor, you used to, in the past, you used to make a lot of money because every time you open your bowels, there's a cash register goes.
You know, I was just thinking when Chun we mentioned indigenous people have a healthier microbiota, they could possibly be super donors.
Right. So I think this is interesting because they have generally higher diversity in terms of the microbiome, but it doesn't mean that they are definitely healthier, because a lot of them has parasitic infections. They have different type of diseases, but they do have a higher diversity. Like I said, it may be due to the exposure to the environment, because of their diet. But so whether their stool has any therapeutic effect, I think there's no answer to that yet.
But the FMT, it has to have an acronym, of course, is magic for people who have this C. diff or Clostridioides difficile infection after antibiotics, and that causes diarrhea. And it was absolutely magic. And that's the illness that's now registered as this is a therapy. It's in guidelines and all that. The biggest, and it's been trialled in all sorts of conditions now, FMT. But the biggest problem that people have had is trying to get the right FMT. Do you give it down this way with a tube? Do you give it up this way with a colonoscope? Do you just have enemas? Or do you throw it into capsules and get people to eat a lot of... And those capsules, of course, are very affectionately called crapsules. And there are some which are,
Yes, so the US has approved one of those pills. It's a fecal transplant pill. Do you think much of it, Junwei?
Right. So I have a look at the website. So it's basically the way that they market it's basically the spores of the mainly Firmicutes, right? So
What is that?
It's a type of it's a group of bacteria, so that can form spores. So the idea is that if you can transfer that to sick people, then it will help to increase the type of bacteria that they have, and in a way, it also bring the beneficial bacteria from the healthy person to the sick person. Yeah. So I think it still require a lot of studies because I haven't really seen a lot of proof or scientific evidence to that on how effective is the oral FMT.
They are effective in C. diff in trials, but not in anything else. We don't know. And of course, that's a very small subset of people who want to have FMT or who people want to give FMT to.
I think just to add on to that, so for the cure rate for C. diff, I think for conventional FMT is about 90%, so it's highly effective. But now FMT has been used for many other different conditions, like including autism, including Parkinson's disease, the IBS, IBD, and so on and so forth. But what is proven at the moment is only C. diff.
And talk to me about autism, because I know many people are looking for therapies or anything that can help with autism.
Yeah, so you could put autism or you could put many conditions down and substitute it. There are many reports of benefits. And these are just people having it and saying how much better they got. And of course we have a problem then. Is this a placebo effect? Is there something else that was happening and they're not controlled? What is missing is a randomised controlled trials where the person getting the therapy doesn't know whether they're getting the FMT or just some brown water or their own faeces back or something. There's ways of doing it so it's controlled. And in ulcerative colitis, these studies have been positive. We don't know how to use it, and it's not still standard therapy, but they've been impressively positive. In many other situations, like in obesity and metabolic syndrome, they have little effects. They have some benefit, some trials, but not magic, not the magic that you get in these observational things where they've treated 3 people and that's good. So in autism, where there's a need for something to improve, what we really need before it can be recommended is proper studies, randomised controlled trials to find if it's good. Because there are many treatments in our medical armamentarium that work beautifully until you do a randomised controlled trial, and you find that it's just because of enthusiasm and the placebo effect that is doing it. So it's a hard one, but to me it's not a very attractive therapy, but it seems to be very popular. It's amazing the people who will do FMT. You ask them to take a tablet and they won't do it, but they have FMT, which is really quite an interesting phenomenon because it's got this bit of magic about it.
Yeah. I don't know what magic you're talking about.
And it has been magic in Clostridium difficile infection and in some patients with ulcerative colitis. It's magic. It has a great effect. But whether, it depends upon whether the set of bugs you get from the FMT is the set that's right for your body.
So we need to find those super donors and pay them well.
And pay them well. You'll find that they'll be driving Mercedes and BMWs.
Selling my stools. How interesting is that? I'm loading up on the fiber. Who knows? It might be my side hustle. Would you have a message for us, Chun?
Right. So this is for the FMT or just overall?
Overall.
Right. So I think we all like our food. Yeah. So food is I think one of the main thing that drives the microbial composition in our gut. So so I think one of the main thing is that to eat healthily. I think the general advice would be a lot of fibers, a bit of protein, a bit of carbohydrate. That would be good for us. And the fiber will be able to feed to make the microbes happy, and for them to actually work for us to produce all the functions, to produce all the metabolites.
What we're finding in clinical practice now is that people are coming to us with a wad of papers with all their microbiota assessed by a laboratory. And what we do is usually look at it and say, thank you very much, and then ask them about what their problems are, because we have no idea how to utilise those results yet. Because to utilise them, we've got to not just say, well, that's a bit high, so we know that will reduce it. We have to know that is going to have an effect. So my message is that microbiota is fascinating the world of the community in general and medical science, because there are many answers to be found, but we aren't there yet. And so I wouldn't waste my money getting it checked just for good health. Sometimes it might be useful in some illnesses, but then again, very seldom. And from a dietary point of view, a balanced diet, healthy diet, which means having lots of fruit and veggies, and a modicum of protein food. Meat is the easiest one to get your nutrients, but you can do it with legumes and other things, and And not to have too much onion. No, only joking. I'm only joking there. That was for you. but it's having a healthy diet is really good. But then there's the argument of what is a healthy diet, and that's an argument which is going on.
Yeah, and so that also has a role to play in your microbiome, how active you are, your environment.
Your exercise is important, and so it's an absolutely fascinating area, and over the next 15 years there's going to be major advances. And every year there's big advances being made because our ability to measure things now, like in the Microbiome Centre here, they've got these fantastic machines that can measure things which a few years ago we'd only dream about measuring. And it can be done accurately, and there are scientists who can do it.
Yeah, and I hope Chun Wee's team will be able to give us some answers for us who live in this part of the world. Thank you very much for joining us, gentlemen. Professor Peter Gibson, Professor of Gastroenterology at the School of Translational Medicine, Monash University, Australia, and Associate Professor Chong Chun Wee, Head of the Future Monash Microbiome Centre here at the School of Pharmacy, Monash University, Malaysia. This has been Future Conversations.
You were listening to Future Conversations, a podcast by Monash University, Malaysia. For more information, email mum.media@monash.edu.